So we got a treat for you tonight. I'm going to give a presentation tonight. It's a kind of an extension of what I've done previously. It'll be talking a little bit about the Bush family, the Clinton family, the Bush crime family, the Clinton crime family, the CIA and the Mafia, and the savings and loan crisis, how they're all tied together. And how everybody knew all about that. They probably would have voted differently quite some time ago. Before we do that, I'm going to give you guys an update on Ukraine. Here's some new information. And this will be the third time I've talked to you guys about Ukraine. And I will say with quite a bit of pride that, well, does anybody think that what I've said so far has been more accurate than the Western media?
Oh, yeah.
We've done a pretty good job. So we've learned a few new things recently. Everyone was wondering from day one, why did this happen? We're taking a step back. It was February 18th or 19th of earlier this year. And the incompetent Biden administration, for the first time, made a prediction: Russia's going to invade Ukraine within a few days. And most of us said, well, these guys haven't been right about anything yet. Why would we think they're going to be right? And a week later, it happened. So how did they know this?
When?
So I'm going to take you back to February of 2021. And it turns out that Ukraine had been moving a bunch of their troops, about 135,000, it's about half their army, towards Crimea, southern part of Ukraine. And it turns out Zelensky made a public proclamation that they were going to militarily take back Crimea. Now, we know Zelensky's a U.S. puppet. There's no way he would have done that unless he was signed off by our State Department. All right. Recall that Crimea, when it got annexed by Russia, took an election and like 92% of their people wanted to join the Russian Federation. So that would be basically like the U.S. sanctioning an invasion. So it doesn't make the U.S. foreign policy look very good once again. So that happened. That's documented. We've got satellite imagery of it that I've looked at. I can't tell if it's authentic or not, but it sure seems to be. Fast forward to, I'm going to pull up some numbers here. February 14th, Valentine's Day of this year, right before this whole thing started. And, oh no, I lost it. Darn phone just took away my statistics. Well, I've got them close enough in my head. So there's an organization called OSCE. It's a civilian watchdog. They've been in the Ukraine since 2014, taking satellite photos and monitoring the civil war that's been going on in Ukraine for the last 8 years. This has happened. There's been reports all over the world. Probably haven't seen it here in America for some reason. They're tracking how many explosions are happening in the separatist region, the Donbass region, the two breakaway republics. In 2014, after we orchestrated the coup in Ukraine, they voted 89% for one of them and 93% for the other to become independent republics. Europe, the European Union and America decided that that was not a legitimate election and decided to ignore it and said, nope, you're still part of Ukraine. The Ukraine has been bombarding that area ever since, and 14,000 Russian-speaking Ukrainians have died in the last 8 years. It's been a civil war. That's been going on. Our media won't tell you that, even though they told you that a lot over the last 6 or 7 years now. They're pretending that the headlines that we have from them no longer exist. So in 2021, they started rattling their sabers. February 14th, 2022, you've got about 70 explosions in that area. Or the next day, February 15th, they got up to about 120. February 16th, it really hit the fan, and they got up to like 700 explosions. And over the next 6 or 7 days, that was the day when they got to 500 or 600 or 700 explosions. That's the day Biden said, Russia's about to invade Ukraine. Well, I wonder why. You're dropping bombs everywhere. I mean, you're dropping bombs, you're nuking civilians, Russian-speaking, Russian ethnic people. This happened, and they got all the way up to 2,000. And then on February 24th, Russia invades. But we have a pretty good idea why. We talked earlier, there's speculation earlier that we may have gone in there because of the biolabs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which they denied, the US military denied that we had biolabs, then admitted there was only a few, then admitted there was 41, and still denied the fact that one of Hunter Biden's companies, Metabiota, thank you, actually is involved with several of these biolabs. They won't admit it out loud. Or they just, why are you denying it if it's for, say, defensive purposes? If it's for defensive purposes, you lead with that, and the story's done. But they've denied it every step of the way. So I don't know what's going on, but if I was Russia, I wouldn't be too happy. More importantly, 3 weeks ago in Davos, at the one of the muckety muck World Economic Forum type things, the head of the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Association, lets it slip that Ukraine had enough weapons grade uranium already to make a nuclear weapon. Now we know it's the most corrupt country in the Northern Hemisphere, and we know they already have some of these oligarchs are already into arms dealing. That would scare the heck out of me, especially when you can drop a nuke in about 3 minutes because Moscow's so close to your border. Remember the nuclear plant was the very first thing Russia took out? Why did Russia go to war?
Protect their people.
Plenty of reasons. It seemed pretty darn defensive to me. And again, we talked about how in 1991, James Baker, who's going to come up again later today, told the world that NATO would not go 1 inch closer to Russia. And since then, 14 countries between the old NATO and Russia, just brick by brick, 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 have encroached on Russian territory. Ukraine was the red line in the sand. The war could have been avoided. All we had to do is say Russia never joins NATO. Ukraine never joins NATO, and Ukraine never gets nuked. And we wouldn't give them that assurance while they're developing nuclear missile material.
And bioweapons.
Well, perhaps bioweapons. We don't have any evidence of that, but I'm okay. If that's a pretty decent speculation, I find it highly plausible as well, but we don't have evidence of it.
So are you changing, I think I missed the second part on Ukraine that I guess you might have talked about at some point. But the one I heard you were saying, you're going through different reasons that Putin could have been invading. And one of your possible reasons was gathering territory to get a certain portion in the New World Order. So
Yeah.
Are you changing your tune on that?
Yeah, I have changed my tune on that. I think, the question was, once upon a time, the first time I gave a presentation on Ukraine, one of the possibilities that I was putting out there was that Putin was part of the World Economic Forum's New World Order. No, I disagree with that now, and I've learned a little bit more. There's something called the Primakov Doctrine. Primakov was the sponsor of both Putin, Yeltsin, and Sergei, whose name I forgot, the 3 of the more powerful people in Russia right now. But the Primakov Doctrine said, among other things, it's all about Russia protecting Russia, is their very first goal. The very first pillar of the Primakov Doctrine is to get Russia away from the unipolar Anglo-American monetary hegemony. They've done that. They're now trading in gold-backed rubles. What that also means is, and we'll get to more Russia later today. There's a couple things that touch on it. What it really means is that the New World Order, the one world government, you don't get one world government when there's other world governments. We also saw Russia, Brazil, India, China all say no to the WHO takeover. Okay, well, that's over 59% of the world population not going to go along with the one world government takeover. One of the New World Orders and World Economic Forum's great reset was to have one global digital currency. Well, now we got 2 or more. So I think what you're going to see happen is Russia's going to finish their very methodical drive and finish up their taking over the eastern provinces of Russian-speaking Ukrainians. They're already setting up economic ties with each territory they take over, moving over to ruble-based stuff and technology. I think you'll end up seeing is the world's going to be moved into different fractioned. It'll be fractional into several major regions, sort of like what I talked about before. Only this time they're going to be independent and not united by this one vision. The downside to that is the dollar loses its reserve currency status. America, who's been running on fumes and basically monetization for the last 25, 30 years, is losing that advantage. So the purchasing power of the dollar should drop by about 20, 25%. And that's an estimate we talked about 10 years ago. And I'm going to go with it still because I haven't seen a better estimate. We're also going to be competing in a world where the Western world, Europe and America, are trying to compete while rebuilding our industrial base using green energy, where Russia, China, and the rest of the developed world is going to be using cheap fossil fuels. Okay. So that's what we have to look forward to. Now, personally, I like our chances if we can shake the shackles of the New World Order and these globalists and the people I'm going to talk about later. If we get them out of the way, all right, let's have some good, fair competition. I like our chances of that. But it's got to get messy first.
I read today where the Africans are collaborating as well, that the continent of Africa, those people are forming their own coalition.
Mhm.
So I think we're gonna see a lot of fractionalization.
The question is about Africa forming their own economic cooperation, as they should. And the last time they tried that, Hillary Clinton destroyed Libya, created the biggest slave market in the world, and said, we came, we saw, he died. So I wish the Africans luck. I hope that they don't face the wrath of people like Hillary, but they should be doing that, having their own regional economic coalitions. They absolutely should be doing that.
What about all the gold they found in Uganda?
I don't have a comment. Haven't done any homework on it.
So I guess in this perspective now, I mean, we know Ukraine is the hub of crap. It makes sense that if Trump was digging his nose into it, speaking to Zelensky and who knows what, they wanted to shut that down through impeachment.
Absolutely.
So that was the whole purpose, perhaps.
A lot of it was also to cover up the crimes they've been doing.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, there's a
He
there's a
didn't
lot.
want him find,
Yeah, there's a lot of
investigating.
there's a lot of skeletons there that are buried. Hey, Mark, that are buried in Ukraine, and it's been a money laundering center for a long, long time.
There's a really good video on YouTube, and it's still up amazingly, that Oliver Stone did on the 2014 election in the Ukraine. And there was a legitimately democratically elected president,
Right.
which we overthrew.
Yes, we did, 100%.
Right.
Talking about the election was 2012, the coup was 2014, and it was another color revolution. We've done those all over the world, like 79 of them, I think, including
We
one.
got it here.
Yeah, I was going to say November 2020, the best of the color revolutions. Anyways, with that, oh, by the way, anybody want their $40 billion of aid back from Ukraine?
Be nice.
So I'm going to give a quick recap of some of the presentations I gave earlier to set the stage for tonight. One of the things I've been trying to do is kind of talk to you about, we kind of, everyone here kind of understands that our government's a little bit on the corrupt side. And I'm going to try to give you more detail. Yeah, just a little bit. I'm going to kind of walk you through some facts and information to help you connect the dots and really understand what that means.
And another thing too, in regards to Ukraine, the way they're geolocated, not just the production of food, you mentioned that in one of the talk before, but also with all the pipelines for gas and access, because they have control to give to all the rest of Europe, and that's big.
Yep. Well, they've also, okay, well, I'll jump into the other presentation next, because that's a good question. What's interesting about Ukraine geographically is it's historically been the gateway to Europe. The original two Chinese Silk Roads ran through Ukraine. China right now, its trade with Europe was running through Ukraine. That's why they kind of kept quiet over the last few months. China's got a little bit at stake here. So they're playing a lot of different people off each other. Ukraine's a breadbasket. It's also been a gateway to a lot of things throughout history. And this goes several different times. It's had major strategic importance. What it's going to be from now on is a sliver of the country, because Poland's going to take back some of their area, I think. It sounds like they're already doing it. And what is the gentleman's name that is Bandera, Stepan Bandera, that all the Ukrainians are built in every city in Ukraine. You can see a statue of this guy. Oh, he's a full-on Nazi, one of the worst of them. Wow. And when it turned out that the Nazis were about to lose, Bandera, who'd been reigning terror in Poland, basically murdered an entire city so they wouldn't be able to testify at the Nuremberg tribunals. But this is a hero in the Ukraine, Bandera. So Ukraine's not going to have a whole lot left economically. It's not going to be very important. We'll find 10 years from now, when everything is divided up the way it looks like it's going to be, you're not going to have America paying much attention to Ukraine. And you'll probably find Zelensky living in his $35 million mansion in Florida. Okay. So on to the backstop. The topic tonight is going to be Bush family, Clinton family, the Mafia, CIA, and how the savings and loan crisis exposed everything to what they were doing. What I've talked about previously, you've heard us talk a lot about Alexander Hamilton, and why Doug and I, who've read a lot about him, are really not fans of Hamilton. And my main reason is there was an economic system in Europe, and it goes all the way back to the Roman days, but I'm not going to do that tonight. But the British economic system, you had some very wealthy merchants, shippers, what have you, a little bit of industrialists. It was right when they were happening, the 17th century. You also had the nobles. And sometimes if you got rich enough as a merchant, they'd make you a noble. And sometimes if you were noble enough, they'd give you money and make you a merchant. But really what it was about the people closest to the seats of power, and it kind of controlled the crown to some degree because they had all the money. But the closer you are to the seat of crown, you get to influence policy. And everybody else is just a serf. It's just feudalism with capitalism on top of it. It's called a mercantilist system. They were using it in Venice. They worked their way through Europe and eventually settled in London. The reason they left Venice is because it was indefensible, because they used to piss off their neighbors so much that they found themselves getting attacked by multiple neighbors all at once. That happened in like 13th, 14th, 15th centuries. So they always wanted to get to England. And that system and the same ancient bloodlines are in Europe. And you talked about how the crown is actually German, which is actually Dutch, which is actually Venetian, which is actually Roman. That's where those bloodlines go through. That's the system we wanted to get away from. And because really what it is you've got the people at the seats of power, they think they're better than you. They didn't understand some of the messages about love thy neighbor, what have you, fair commerce, where both people win on the sides of a trade. They looked at the world as something to exploit. And that's where we got colonialism from, going back for thousands of years. They didn't invent war, but they sure perfected it. And yeah, the damage they've done around the world. And of course, one of the things you do is you exploit all the territories. You keep them down, you want to keep their population poor so they work cheap. So you can take their resources and ship them back to the homeland. That's mercantilism.
Yeah.
We live under this today. That's what our foreign policy has been for a better part of a century. And I talked about a little bit about that policy as we got to the 20th century. You had the law firm of Sullivan and Cromwell, who was basically the CIA before there was such a thing as an intelligence agency. These law firms would go to these countries, and they had the Rockefellers used lawyers too. Not the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds used lawyers back in the day. But the Sullivan and Cromwell was the biggest, most influential Wall Street law firm going back to the 1870s. And we performed coups. Question?
Related to the British Commonwealth, by any chance, do you know?
I looked at that once. The question is whether Sullivan and Cromwell were related to British, and I don't think so but there's a possibility, bloodlines. But I haven't seen a direct connection. No, it's a great question. Sullivan and Cromwell was Sullivan was dead by the time they started doing this. Cromwell's the guy that did all the work. Sullivan was an interesting guy. He was he's a New York lawyer, and all the southern states in the Civil War used him. All the slave states, all the slave owners and stuff like that. So he's a nice guy. Anyways, they committed coups or led the way to set the stage for coups. They're the ones who annexed Panama from Colombia so we could build the Panama Canal. They're the ones who set the stage and did all the intelligence so we can invade Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the Philippines. That was Sullivan and Cromwell. There's a few more. Fast forward, Major General Smedley Butler, the most decorated Marine officer in history, when he wrote his book, War is a Racket, complained, he goes, for 35 years, I've basically been a mercenary for corporate interests. And that's what they were doing. Sullivan and Cromwell represented it like the 50 richest families in America. People like the Bushes, the DuPonts. DuPont's a real big name here. And DuPonts were real big into food and fruit. Well, you ever heard of the term banana republic?
Yeah.
This is the story. We go in there, overthrow their government, install a puppet, keep their people impoverished, and Dole and United Foods and all these other people, U.S. companies would be able to go in there and get their fruit, everything like that for free or a lot cheaper. That's what the Banana Republic came from. We'll get another story about the Banana Republic tonight as I go through. Fast forward, this cabal, this cartel of American interests, all having ties to Yale and the Skull and Bones Society, and a lot of the elite families of America, the Yankees, as we like to call them, of the Northeast, the blue blood families. They thought they were better than the rest of the world, didn't have to follow the rules. Well, we have World War I. I'm not going to go through the causes of that, but at the end of it, we had the Treaty of Versailles. Interestingly enough, at the end of the Treaty of Versailles, during the Treaty of Versailles, representing Germany was Allen Dulles, and representing some Western interests was his brother, John Foster Dulles. Coincidentally, they were attached to Sullivan and Cromwell. And what they did is they set up the Treaty of Versailles, a situation where the German industrial capabilities were bankrupted. And so the American interests could go in there and pick up the assets, pennies on the dollar. And basically this was done through a company called Brown Brothers Harriman. Harriman at the time was the inherited more money than history from his father, who was a railroad magnate. One-time president of Brown Brothers Harriman at the time during the 20s was a guy by the name of Prescott Bush. He's a fun guy. And so these people were basically financing the rise of the Nazi Party. We give the go-ahead to Hitler to become chancellor in 1933-34. At the same time, the business plot occurs, to where a bunch of American industrialists tried to commit a coup against FDR. Interesting. That actually happened. But Major General Smedley Butler was supposed to lead the military and become the leader of America, the military, the chancellor of America. That's what these people had planned. This actually happened. Major General Smedley Butler gave testimony in front of Congress that this was that this is what they had planned. He goes, I don't want any part of it. And it ended. FDR's in power and somehow can't put a single one of these people in jail until 1942, when they actually they imprisoned Prescott Bush for trading with the enemy, because he was doing that because we were in war with Germany now, and they kept on trading with him. A lot of American interest, Ford Motor Company, everything like that. They kept doing that. So we get to World War II, and one of the problems, anybody remember the name of the ship they sank in New York Harbor? I should know this one. I just forgot it. I drew a blank on it. Long story short, we didn't really have an intelligence agency. Law firms aren't good at military intelligence, so military intelligence sprung out of nowhere. Turned out these lawyers are pretty good at it, and some of these people like the Dulles brothers, who tried to overthrow FDR, were called in to come work for the U.S., even though they tried to stay out of the war the whole time. So they created the military intelligence, and they had to find a way to secure the docks of New York Harbor. And if you wanted to secure the docks of New York Harbor, who are you going to go to? Probably the Mafia. Yeah. Well, that's what they did. Lucky Luciano had been in jail for 2 years. Governor Dewey of New York is the one who put him in there as a prosecutor. He's now the governor of New York. Gets to pardon him 2 years later. And the deal, you got all kinds of good deals. But the Mafia really wanted to work with the Americans against Nazis, because what's the first thing Mussolini did with the fascists when he came to power? He imprisoned all the Mafia guys in Sicily. So all their families in prison, they go, heck yeah, we'd like to get rid of Mussolini. So they were very happy to do this. So they start working with our military, and the Mafia starts working with the military and the military intelligence. And we know how World War II went. The OSS is created, the first U.S. intelligence agency in 1947-48. It becomes the CIA. The first head of the CIA was a guy by the name of Allen Dulles. And the head of the State Department at the time is a guy by the name of his brother, John Foster Dulles. Okay. And they're all still good buddies with Prescott Bush and all the other Harrimans and everyone like that. The same crony clowns. They never really saw much. They never paid the price for what they'd done. But anytime you hear someone talk about, every time I hear someone say the State Department, I just hear CIA. To me, there's no difference. The different wings are the same thing. And they really are. The people that have been running all the Ukraine stuff, well, it's been the State Department orchestrating it. Well, you want to know who created the Azov Battalion? Darn right, that was CIA. Yeah, they're involved. So, which brings us, we're going to fast forward a few years to the 70s and 80s. Now, there's been some shenanigans through the 60s. These same people started wars for corporate reasons in Vietnam and Korea, and a few other little police actions here and there. With a few American lives lost if we can turn a profit. But
what was the profit in Vietnam?
CIA triangle drug trade.
Drug trade of what?
Oh, the opium trade.
Opium?
Oh yeah, the CIA got filthy rich with that. I'm going to get into that a little bit, but yeah, it's a great question. She goes, what was the profit in Vietnam? No, it's pretty filthy. It's called the triangle, something triangle. Remember which triangle? Yeah, the triangles all look alike to me. All right, so tonight I only have 3 pages of notes, so it won't go too long. There's a former reporter from the Houston Chronicle by the name of Peter Bruton, and he wrote a book called The Mafia, CIA, and George Bush. In the review, it says he tells of one of the most momentous stories of the past 50 years and how it has been suppressed by the establishment media and Congress. It shows the incredible complexity of the relationships and the operation of the destruction of hundreds of savings and loans at the hands of the CIA and the Mafia, stealing many billions of dollars in the process and leaving the taxpayers to bail out the banks. Big names at the state and national levels of power are involved, including Lloyd Bentsen, Democrat, almost on the presidential ticket a couple of times, the Bush family, power brokers in Houston. We'll get more names later. Tonight's going to be about a lot of names, and I'm leaving a whole bunch out. People such as Kenneth Keating and Don Dixon, who are mentioned prominently in the press in connection with the savings and loan debacle, were merely the front men or cutouts for the main movers. Keating and his ilk only took millions. The CIA and mafia looted billions. So what allowed them to do that? What happened with the savings and loan crisis? First of all, what is a savings and loan? It was a bank. It was supposed to be like a community bank, and they were supposed to give loans to middle America. Okay, that sounds pretty good. So what happened is a bunch of people in town would put their money into a savings and loan bank, and the savings loan bank would make loans for people to build and buy homes, and you as a saver would get some of the interest. It was sort of like a mutual life insurance company was the idea. Decent comparison. It's not perfect. Someone will call me on that who's watching this, but we deregulated that. So one thing about FDR, whether you like them or love them, the Security Acts of 1933 and 1934, they did a really good job. I have lived under these rules, and they're actually pretty darn fair to keeping banks in check. So every time you deregulate them, deregulate good regulation, something bad happens. We've heard about deregulation caused the financial crisis. Well, it absolutely did. That in 1998 and 99, Bushes and Clintons worked together to deregulate. So Wall Street's investment banks and merchant bank, commercial banks couldn't have, the Chinese wall disappeared. And all of a sudden now you had banks like Wells Fargo and Washington Mutual, who's no longer in business in the investment banking business. It's got really, deregulation hasn't worked out too well when you have good regulation.
Actually, Washington Mutual got purchased by Chase.
Yeah, but it's because their stock price was about 30 cents at the time. Had a good friend working there. Because of deregulation in the banking industry, many S&Ls throughout the country were either taken over by disreputable people or by honest people turned dishonest by the lure of easy money and the low probability of prosecution. One regulation change of particular note was the thrift ownership requirement. In 1982, this requirement was changed from mandating that a minimum of 400 shareholders with no shareholder owning more than 25%. Remember, this is a community bank. You don't want to have one person making all the decisions. Switched to allowing a single shareholder own 100% of the bank. So this attracts the crooks. I'll just tell you how the scheme works real quickly. Bill is my partner in crime. Mark is a landowner. Your land is worth $1 million. I'm going to make Bill a loan for $2 million. Bill's going to then sell it on the open market for 1.5. You got $500,000. I'm sorry, Bill's going to buy it from you for 1.5. So you made 500 grand. You're happy as all heck. Now you're out of the picture. You sold your land. Bill's got to fund something he paid 1.5 million for. I gave him a loan for, and he's done it through some kind of shell corporation and stuff like that. It's still only worth $1 million. Well, you did it through a corporation to which you then bankrupt, default on your loan. You keep the 500 million excess of the million you sold us. So you made 500 million, stuff like that, because you got a loan for 1.5. It got taken out of $1 million. I'm the bank. I made a bunch of initiation fees. So we all made money. So who lost? The taxpayer, the FDIC. That's the scam. They were overvaluing. They were self-dealing, and it was attracting all kinds of the worst people. There was no regulation. They knew they could get away with it. Got a quote here about that.
That's what they created then, the FDIC with the specific cap for
See?
bank. That's what they created, the FDIC with a specific cap.
That happened before. The FDIC happened after the Great Depression, or shortly thereafter. It was well before the.
So for a certain amount. So
Yeah.
how did it? So they just cash out, kind of like insurance.
Well, the FDIC paid off a lot of this stuff. Paid off a lot of these banks. So the banks would fold or would be in danger of falling. Depositors lost their money. Savings loans got wiped out everyone. They weren't all terrible. Some of them were run legitimately, but there was enough bad actors, and it was pretty bad. My dad was in commercial banking at the time. And we knew people who worked for savings loans that were decent people, but the people who owned the bank decided to play their little shenanigans. It was also a wonderful tool for money laundering. And when you're doing things like shipping guns out of the country and drugs into the country, and you're the mafia or the CIA, you might need some good money laundering opportunities. Mainland Savings was a big name. That was in Houston, Texas. That's connected to George H.W. I'm sorry, it's connected to George W. Bush. He was involved in that, and there's a bunch of other names to go through mainland. So I'm going to go through a bunch of names, and you're going to start hearing some of them connected to each other, and they could be repeated over and over again. We know a bunch of them. When they did these loans and stuff, like very little money went into construction. They went into raw land and existing buildings, and the people who owned these lots were the power structure of this country. This was basically a way for the rich to loot the rest of us. It was just, I mean, just clear as day. It was a scheme. So who are some of the big names? You had Lloyd Benson, the Democratic power broker. Orrin Hatch recently passed away. Oh, good Republican senator of Utah. Not so much. The Bush children, James Baker, Bill Clinton was involved in this stuff, and that's we'll get to him at the end. But there's just a lot of the power brokers. A name I'd like you to introduce you to, you may not know, is a guy by the name of Walter Mischer. And if you don't know him, we all should, because he pretty much was the kingmaker in Texas for decades. And how he got there is really interesting. In 1952, Mischer was 30 years old. He was a sewer contractor with the city of Houston. Good gig, good business. Somehow, he buys into a bunch of Honduran paper mills in Honduras. We sold to them, and it was sold to them by another power broker by the name of Clint Murkison Jr. Anybody remember that name? No, he's got his own. That's a whole lecture on its own. In 1952, coincidentally, the CIA and United Fruit, which is a Dulles client, they staged a coup of Guatemala, which was staged from the land that Mischer had just purchased. So now we have him connected with the CIA. What else do we know about Mischer? He became a powerful land developer. He owned Allied Bank, the third largest bank in Houston. Allied.
Oh,
He's connected to organized crime in many ways. A bunch of different. Can't go into all those rabbit trails because there's too many of them. This would be like a 4-hour lecture if I tried to give them all of them. So I'm trying to give you the big picture. He was very close to LBJ and Bush. So again, we have Democrats and Republicans. So the guy's connected to both. Well, these politicians don't care about the political party. You know, if someone has a R next to his name and he says a bunch of stuff we like and then does something we don't like the recent Second Amendment, that's because he knows he never has to face a re-election again. Normally, the lip service they pay to values that we sort of, the voters, it's to fool us into thinking they're one of us. As soon as they don't have to worry about us anymore, they cash in big time. And we're seeing it right now. It drives me nuts. He was involved with something called Herman Hospital, which had all kinds of insider dealings. It was not operating as a charity. It was supposed to be a charitable hospital. All kinds of money laundering went through that hospital. You can imagine how much the mafia was involved in that one. And again, we go back to the mafia was connected to the intelligence agencies in World War II. Do you think the mafia ever lets go of something they get their toes into? No, absolutely not. A real close affiliate of Walter Mischer was Carlos Marcello, who just happened to be the New Orleans mafia boss. They were co-investors in several properties. Mischer's kids went to school and were very close friends with the Bush children. George H.W. Bush's children. The whole families are very close. Mischer and his partners, including Coca-Cola, they then bought about 700,000 acres in Belize, which turned out to be a CIA deal. And Mischer's son-in-law was a CIA veteran as well. Trying to make the connection, CIA, mafia, something like that. And he bought land at a Texas border where the drug planes started landing, coincidentally. A little bit further. There's a place called, another one of these SNLs was called Sunrise Savings in Florida. They were about to get prosecuted, and there's who was involved in that? There's a couple of these people, Mischer and a few others, which I'll get to in a second. When they were getting prosecuted in the mid 80s, Vice President GHWB intervened. $700 million taxpayer loss, and he kept anyone from being prosecuted. Then I introduce you to Neil Bush. Let me do James Baker first. James Baker, former Secretary of State. He was involved in mainland savings as well. He lent money to Adnan Khashoggi. Anybody remember Adnan Khashoggi? Oh, yeah, he's a Middle Eastern terror sponsor, everything like that. His nephew, it's his nephew, was Jamal Khashoggi, the quote-unquote journalist who was murdered in the Saudi embassy. And everyone said, what a great, Washington Journal. They just named the street in Washington, D.C. that runs in front of the Saudi embassy. They call it Jamal Khashoggi Boulevard now, just to rub the Saudis' faces in it. This guy was a spy. The guy was best friends with Osama bin Laden. Follow the names, follow the money. It's pretty bad. So Baker's involved in mainland savings. He's also the former manager of the law firm the regulators hired to investigate mainland savings. So We got a little home cooking going on there too. Neil Bush is involved with Silverado Savings, which is another fun one. I'm gonna get to in a second. Here's another fun name for you, Herman K. Beebe. He was basically in charge of the mafia organization that did a lot of real estate deals in La Costa, California, 5 minutes from here.
Yep, that's all.
Yep.
Okay.
He's got a connection to a guy by the name of Barry Seal. Barry Seal was a famous CIA pilot who was flying in and out of Mena, Arkansas. He became a whistleblower. Barry Seal's no longer with us. Yeah. Barry Seal, he got the theory is he got Arkansided, but he had a lot to say first. Herman K. Beebe is a very interesting guy. He was partners with a name that you probably didn't expect to hear tonight, but you all know and love, Stephen Halper from the Trump-Russia collusion. If you recall, Stephen Halper was the person the FBI sent in there to basically try to entrap a couple of Trump campaign people, and was one of the main reasons they were able to get the FISA warrants in the first place.
Wasn't he heavily connected to Clinton?
Stephen Halper? Yep. You're about 2 lines ahead of me. Yeah. Well, he's more, yeah. Stephen Halper's father-in-law was Ray Klein. But no, I'm sorry, there's a connection here. I forgot one of these guys is related to Ray Klein. Ray Klein was the former number 3, is one of the founding members of the CIA. He was their operations guy. A lot of books written about Ray Klein. Halper became Bush's director of public policy issues for G.H.W. Bush's 80 campaign. And then he went on to work for the State Department. He's a spook. I mean, there's no question about that. He also became a partner with in Palmer National Bank with Beebe's, one of Beebe's henchmen, the guy by the name of McLean. Stephen Halper was also the very last entry in Oliver North's White House diaries. And again, with Oliver North, the whole Iran-Contra, which we're going to get into in a second. When they subpoenaed, when they did the investigation, the very last thing he wrote was about Stephen Halper, and the entry read, Legal Defense Fund, Stephen Halper. And he was very close to Oliver North. So, who gets peddled out on to this day on Fox News. And so, okay. This all circles back to Neil Bush and Silverado Bank. Neil Bush is George W. Bush's brother, son of GHWB. He settled in the Denver area where he was friends, very close friends with the family of John Hinckley Jr., the man who shot Reagan. Uh-huh. Told you we're gonna get a couple fun ones. When Silverado Holdings failed, Neil Bush paid a $50,000 fine with no criminal charges. And he was one of the officers or owners. So another more insider dealing. Putin's relationship, Bush's relationship with the late, Neil Bush's relationship, he had a really close relationship with the controversial oligarch by the name of Boris Berezovsky, was a very big political enemy of Vladimir Putin. So if you want to know where some of the anti-Putin stuff comes from, there you have it. In 2002, Neil Bush signed a consulting contract that paid $2 million in stock over 5 years to work for Grace Semiconductor Manufacturing Corp., a firm backed by Jiang Manheng, the son, sorry if I know I mispronounced that one, the son of former Chinese President Jiang Zemin. So you know how Hunter Biden got put on the board of Burisma? Yeah, Neil Bush was doing the same thing in 2002. Same darn relationship. And what I talked about when I was doing my Great Reset introduction, I talked about how the Bushes in the 70s became the gatekeepers to anybody doing business with China. The Bushes in China are like this. And it was, of course, it was the Clintons who made the most favored nation status so we could export all our manufacturing there. So if you want to know if the Bushes and the Clintons are in bed together, that tells you a lot. Then we have Jeb Bush. We're not going to go into him too much because he's got low energy. Jeb Bush had a relationship with a couple of Cuban operatives, Codina Pedreira, and I can't read the other name, but why do we know them? Well, they were some of the major operators in the Bay of Pigs. Once again, CIA operation. They had actually bought a savings and loan from Lloyd Benson. So the circle, the webs, they never stopped going. So where does Clinton come in here? Remember the Whitewater investigation? Yeah, it was starting in the 70s where Bill and Hillary, Bill was a young governor and making $35,000 a year. And that wasn't enough for Bill and Hillary. So they, got a couple sweetheart deals and partnered with another couple people. I think they were Danielson's or a name like that. And they invested in a place that they called Whitewater. Well, it didn't work out too well. They lost money. The Clintons lost money on it, but there was a whole lot of shenanigans that went around it. I bring it up because that was actually the wrong thing to do. Well, Monica Lewinsky was the wrong thing to impeach Clinton on. Whitewater was a pretty good thing to impeach because there's a whole lot of rabbit holes to go down there. But what it really demonstrates is how the Clintons were always very much money hungry. They wanted a lot more money. Now, if people think Bill Clinton is some simpleton from Arkansas, they've got it wrong. He was a Rhodes Scholar. And when you hear that, you should cringe. We don't talk about this enough, and I could probably do a whole presentation on this. Rhodes Scholar is named after Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes was a British industrialist, well, not industrialist, miner. He went to Africa probably with a whole lot of Rothschild's money. When he died, he was the second or third richest man in the world. You want to talk about the one man who did more to destroy Africa than anyone else? It's Cecil Rhodes. They named Rhodesia. Well, he named Rhodesia after himself. Now they call it Zimbabwe because of all that. Look, one time I'm fine with renaming something. That would be it. Cecil Rhodes was a bad guy. He also happened to be a Malthusian, which means he believed in limited population. They thought the Anglo noble families were superior. And he left his entire fortune to the Rhodes Foundation, which created at Oxford the Rhodes Scholar Program. And every single year, 6 Americans, blue bloods, get chosen to go there. It's basically become a tool of the Anglo International Order. And then they come back to America and start implementing their own version of the globalist dystopian future. Not only was Bill Clinton a Rhodes Scholar, but his number right-hand man, Strobe Talbot, was as well. And like I said, we go down the whole list of Rhodes Scholars, and you guys are just going to cringe at some of the names and some of the things they've done. And we ship people off to London who somehow people still think are our friends. I like English people, but love of God, their government hasn't done me any favors. And anyways, they get an educated Oxford, indoctrinated into a certain way of thinking, an elitist, Malthusian, dystopian view of the world, and they come back here. So that's Bill Clinton for you. And do we even need to talk about Hillary? Here's a quote. There would be no Clinton dynasty without the Iran-Contra scandal. So what happened was Bill gets involved in some savings and loan stuff. But more importantly, the CIA is doing their drug smuggling into Mena, Arkansas, and that's where the whole Iran-Contra was our CIA and State Department shipping weapons to Iran for whatever reason in exchange for U.S. prisoners being released from Lebanon. At the same time, they're arming the Sandinistas to overthrow government in Nicaragua. Highly illegal, but not the first time we've done it. We had government hearings on it. Bill Clinton was involved. He was so involved, he was a hands-on guy. He didn't have anyone else. He was just going to the airport, talking to the pilots in Mena, Arkansas, and a couple of the whistleblowers, including one who's no longer with us, met him and knew him very well. In the Conspirators, there's a book called The Conspirators: Secrets of an Iran-Contra Insider. Al Martin describes the Iran-Contra enterprise as a vast operation that included, but was not limited to, drugs, weapons, terrorism, war, money laundering, criminal banking, and securities fraud, currency fraud, real estate fraud, insurance fraud, blackmail, extortion, and political corruption that involved countless Washington politicians of both Republican and Democratic parties. This is in the 80s. This was going on. Further from Martin. When George Bush, George H.W.B., the former CIA director, Bill Casey, and Oliver North initiated their plan of government-sanctioned fraud and drug smuggling, they envisioned using about 500 men to raise $35 billion for these endeavors. They ended up using about 5,000 operators, making way over $35 billion. In addition, the operation became a government within a government, comprising some 30,000 to 40,000 people the American government turns to when it wishes certain illegal covert operations to be extent pursuant to a political objective. Yeah, that's who runs our country and has been, with George H.W. Bush at the top of the pyramid. Iran-Contra was a replication of the CIA's Golden Triangle drug trafficking in Southeast Asia, operations also connected to Bush. Oh, by the way, do you remember the Iran hostage crisis? you know who became the head of the CIA literally 3 months before that happened? Anyone want to guess? George H.W. Bush. Are there coincidences? Maybe. But on a larger scale and sophistication, greater complexity and far-reaching impact that remains palpable to this day. In the book George Bush, The Unauthorized Biography, Webster Tarpley wrote that George H.W. Bush created new structures called special situation groups, terror incident working groups within the Reagan administration, and that all of these structures revolved around creating the secret command role of then Vice President George Bush. One of the things Reagan said, notably, is that my vice president's more active in foreign policy than any vice president in history. Boy, was he right. I don't know if he knew this stuff. I really don't. I've got no indication that Reagan knew any of this was going on. I think he was a figurehead, and Bush was running it the whole time. That's what it starts to look like. The Bush apparatus within and behind the government was formed to carry out covert policies to make war when the constitutional government had decided not to make war, to support enemies of the nation, terrorists and drug runners, who are the friends and agents of the secret government. They're still doing it today. CIA deep cover agent pilot Chip Tatum, a key Iran-Contra player who flew drugs into Mena, Arkansas, worked along CIA pilot and drug smuggler Barry Seal. Just another guy who apparently is no longer with us. From another book, Rodney Stitch's called Drugging America. Mena, Arkansas became famous in the 1980s for the arms and drugs shipping through this Western Arkansas airport by the CIA and other government agencies. It involved Oliver North, Vice President and then President George Bush, Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton, others who became involved in covert activities. This has been documented quite a bit. This is not a secret. I'm not making stuff up. This was in the news at the time. These books were written a while back. The Rose Law Firm. Anybody remember that one? Of which Hillary Clinton and Webster Hubbell, who may not be Chelsea's dad, and who's no longer with us. Webb Hubbell?
What did you find? What did you pass?
Oh, well, he was probably Arkansas during the impeachment trials when they were doing the Whitewater files. The story, if you want to believe the conspiracy theory, either he died of natural causes while files were missing from the Whitewater. They somehow disappeared the same night he passed away. Yeah, that's one of the more famous theories that Hillary Arkansas-ed somebody. And I have no idea if he's actually Chelsea's dad or not, but I think it's pretty funny.
Take a look at the picture.
Fair enough.
That's all you need to do.
So the Rose Law Firm, they were senior partners. They were negotiating contracts for the CIA in Mena, Arkansas, and helped set up numerous fraudulent CIA fronts for cocaine and weapons transit. That's documented fact. There's a Kathy O'Brien,
Yes.
author of Trace Formation of America. She claims to have witnessed and overheard meetings as far back as the early 1980s, in which George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton planned to pass the White House between the two of them and between their respective political clans, therefore maintaining the New World Order for the long term. Now, if we assume that G.H.W. Bush, he's running the CIA in the late 70s, becomes the vice president for apparently puppet Ronald Reagan in 1980, becomes president in 88, Clinton's 92 through 2000, we get George W. Bush in 2000 to 2008. I'm going to, for the purpose of this conversation, because I don't know for fact where Obama's connections come from. There's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of CIA connections to him, but I don't have enough evidence to say that. For the purpose tonight, I'm going to assume that he's one part of the same tribe. There's a reason Hillary stepped aside for him. So we had Obama from 2008 through 2016. Hillary's supposed to take over from 2016 through 24. That was basically 44 years plus of the same dynasty running America, its foreign policy, its Justice Department with all of their puppets. That's what Trump got us to avoid. And why do you think the deep state and when I say deep state, I'm talking about the establishment politicians, the families behind them, the blue bloods. When Trump came in there and stopped all these trade deals, do you know how much money that cost some of these people? The media went after him. We've never seen anybody go after him. It's one reason he got in the flow of their deal making. There were trillions at stake. So to finish with a couple of quotes.
Was he able to solve it? Any of it?
The president only has so much power. When you have a Congress, we
Well, he had everybody against him. I just didn't know if he was able to.
he's got some power because they were still trying to pretend that we had a legitimate government. They still tried to impeach him twice on fake stuff. Look, how do you know he's such a constitutional president? Because he had to be. But more importantly, if he'd ever done anything unconstitutional, they would have impeached him. The fact that they had to make up 2 reasons to impeach him tells you he never really did anything wrong. They're still trying to make stuff up.
Well, they sport speed.
You know, I don't want to go there.
Okay.
I don't want to go there. I'd love to have that conversation offline because I got a couple new thoughts on that. But just talking about Operation Warp Speed, it's going to take us off track, if you don't mind.
I know.
But and this isn't about defending Trump or anything like that. And I love the man for the fact that he stopped these people in their plans and if nothing else. Yeah, that was great. Yeah, he did some good. What Donald Trump did for more than anything else, he's got these people that come out from under their rocks and show their faces so the rest of us know what we're dealing with.
Mhm.
You know, yeah. I wouldn't have done all the homework to know this stuff if I hadn't seen what they were doing. I'm like, what the heck is going on? So I started asking questions and reading. 2 quotes to finish this one up. The whole world has been divided into territories and sub-territories, which are fastidiously administered by a local mafia. Each territory also has its point men who are also operate within the local law enforcement apparatus to ensure that the real bad guys never get caught. Sound familiar? If they are caught by a really good detective, the judiciary is likewise hardwired to ensure that the case is favorably disposed of in the quickest and quietest way. This is how they rig the system. One last quote, Woodrow Wilson. A lot of us aren't crazy about him because he's there in 1913 and signed the Federal Reserve Act, and we got the 16th and 17th Amendments, and he got us into World War I. I suggest that he might have been more of a puppet than a puppet master, and was led around by strings. And I take that from the memoirs of his own children who he spoke to, and they talked about how there was being led around the White House by his nose when he was running to meet all the important people. But here's a quote from him after he was out of office. Since I entered politics, I have chiefly had men's views confided to me privately. He talks to a lot of powerful people. Some of the biggest men in the United States in the fields of commerce and manufacturing are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive that they better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. That's from the sitting president of the United States. He talked about the real powers behind the throne. And that's what I got tonight. I hope in conclusion, we were run by pirates.
Is there a connection to IBS? International Bank of Settlements?
Yeah, well, that's from more of a globalist standpoint. Is that the Bank of International Settlements you're asking about?
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
BIS.
You know, did you see the presentation I gave on the Bank of International Settlements?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all connected. Bank of International Settlements is more from a different fact. So if you look at the world, yeah, it's really easy to say there's black hats, there's white hats. There's a globalist versus, and you talk about, we have fascism versus communists. No, I think what the truth is that every country around the world has puppet masters, fifth column, deep state actors, and they're the ones who pull the strings either in front of the scenes or behind the scenes. And this goes back centuries. And it's the Anglo-American alliance who's been at the forefront for a long time. China's got its own deep state in fifth column. Russia has its, and Putin's kicked a lot of them out. That's why we have Moscow and the Thames. The people who started the Bank of International Settlements and all that, they were more of a globalist, and they were running one side of American foreign policy a little bit differently than the Bush faction was. Now, I suggested for a while those two factions started working together in the 70s when we started getting this one world government, new world order thing right there. But the Bank of International Settlements happened around the same time period, but I don't think it was as closely related to tonight's story. I think there's other factors involved in that. And I think that was actually truly a Marxist creation, and whether this is more of a fascist. Okay. More questions? Any other questions?
Well, I think the hardest thing for me to get with all of this when it comes to the new world order and globalists and elitists and everything is I realize it affects us as the peasants, so to speak. But what do they really want? Because when you say the new world order, what, do they want us all to be slaves and they're living in their mansions?
That's absolutely it. It's
They want to get rid of us.
They want-
have the whole world.
what
I mean, because it's not realistic. Their egos are so out of whack that they
It's happening
It's
though.
not realistic. It's never going to happen to the extent that they think it's going to happen.
Well, it's-
And they get it in degrees.
What happened with COVID?
It has.
It's enslavement of everything. Look at BlackRock, which is
Well,
stock
let me-
market for
Let me answer,
China.
let me answer the question. What they want is a return to feudalism. We have lords and serfs.
Right.
They do not like a middle class. Middle class happened because of 1776. And despite all of this corruption, America became the greatest economic power in the history of the world. And created some really great people that are liked around the world. When we travel, they like us. They hate our government. Gee, I can't wonder why. You know, it's because our government is always trying to keep them down. It's a feudalist, it's a mercantilist system. It's all about power, though, at the end of the day. And you know, I could go down a couple other ways of describing it. They really want a feudal system. And if you look at some of the writings going back to Thomas Malthus, who created the Malthusian, who's the first of the depopulation guys, and all the different thinkers, Hegel, Marx, everyone like that. They're all from the same universities. These universities schools are funded by the same elite financiers and elites we're talking about. They control what these universities are taught. This is where all the leaders, all of our politicians come from the same schools. There's no reason it's like that. They actually think they're a class above. And they really don't like how pesky we are. We're deplorable. Anyone else?
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you.